Welcome to this session of the PlantPure Summit. Today, we want to welcome Dr. Monica Aggarwal. Dr. Monica Aggarwal is a cardiologist from Baltimore, Maryland, board-certified in cardiology, echocardiography, and nuclear cardiology. She has expertise in heart failure, pulmonary hypertension, women's heart disease and prevention, and one of her main focuses is to educate people about the importance of plant-based nutrition and its benefits in treating and potentially reversing chronic illness. She prides herself on being a doctor who takes people off medications by adding healthful diet and lifestyle changes. Welcome, Dr. Aggarwal.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
Well, I'm really glad you can make it. I know you're very busy. You've been traveling around the world, and you're back here in the States. And one of the first questions I love to ask doctors is, how long have you been plant-based? And were you plant-based before you became a doctor?
Yeah, so, when I was 16 years old, I became vegetarian. I actually grew up, I'm Indian by birth, and my parents were vegetarian. So, but when we came to the United States, and when they came to the United States, they were so worried about us fitting in that they fed us meat. And so I grew up eating McDonald's because my parents didn't really know where to get meat. So that's where everybody went. So that's where they went. So when I was about 15 years old, I decided that maybe I didn't like eating meat and became vegetarian, but I still had dairy and egg in my diet. I would say that I wasn't a good vegetarian. It was not until about 4 or 5 years ago that I actually became completely plant-based. So I was already a physician by then. I had my third child at the time, and after I had my third child, I became very sick with a debilitating form of an autoimmune disease called rheumatoid arthritis. It came on very suddenly, and within a few week period, I went from being an athlete and a runner to crawling up the stairs. I would call that one of the darkest times for me, because within a few weeks of time, I went from thinking that I could do everything in the world. I think when you're in your 20s and 30s, you have this feeling that you're invincible. And I definitely had that invincibility, that I thought that I could do anything, but I just needed to sacrifice a little bit of sleep and a little bit of time, and everything would work out. But then you quickly realize that it all catches up to you. And so it really took me getting sick to realize that I had to change my lifestyle and get healthier. So I've been plant-based for about 4 years now, I would say, and haven't looked back.
So when you became a doctor, you were vegetarian, at least before. So
Right.
When you became a doctor, how much training did they provide you in terms of plant-based nutrition?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we're looking at this. I'm part of the American College of Cardiology Nutrition Committee, and we're actually looking at this in medical schools, because all of us on the committee were saying, you know what, we really have had no nutrition training in medical school. Let's see if this is the national standard. And the reality is that it really is. And so most people are getting between an hour to a couple of hours of nutrition education in medical school. Remember, at medical school is 4 years. And to know that you're only getting sort of less than a day's worth of nutrition education is overwhelming. So then you can imagine, if we're doing that much nutrition education, what percentage is actually on plant-based, which is almost zero. So most of us in medicine today have very little education on nutrition and lifestyle. So that's really the problem, isn't it? That when we as physicians, we tell our patients to eat better and to take care of themselves, we don't actually know how to tell them. When we say cut out your fats and eat less cholesterol and be more active, but we don't know how to teach them how. And it really took a lot of sort of self-teaching, a lot of conferences, a lot of education and a lot of self-learning to really understand how to eat, and then to be able to impart that knowledge to my patients. So that was sort of a course that I had to start on my own. I also did the University of Arizona Integrative Fellowship, which also helped me a lot with sort of learning a lot of lifestyle tools in terms of healing.
Wow. Now, in dealing with your colleagues, because as you said, you're really involved in wanting to change things. What's kind of the pushback that you get from your colleagues about even just promoting basic plant-based nutrition, let alone going into more advanced?
It's very complex. I'm in a very complicated world. Cardiologists are complicated people, and one of my senior partners we used to joke, he likes to wear a shirt that says, I'll eat my steak and I'll take my Crestor too. Well, we all know that that doesn't really work, and sadly, there are many people and many of my patients actually who feel that way, like, look, don't mess with me about my diet. I'm just going to take my pills and I'll be fine. And unfortunately, a lot of that is taught by their physicians as well, like, well, just take your Lipitor, you'll be fine. And to clarify, Lipitor and Crestor are cholesterol medications that drop your cholesterol down. And so there's a lot of pushback in my cardiology community. But there are definitely people that are slowly understanding, because I find that what's interesting is that when people are when they talk to their patients, they don't spend a lot of time on it. But when they hear me talk about it, they're like, wow, I didn't really know that. And then I see small changes in their own attitude. And interestingly, since I've been doing this now, I have a lot of physicians who contact me, not about their own patients, but about themselves. And what's interesting about that has been that, not just cardiologists, but psychiatrists, intensivists, and say, hey, what do you think about this? This is what I've noticed about my health. I'm reaching this point in my life where I'm noticing my joints hurt, or was just diagnosed with this condition or that condition. Can you help me? And then I find that people slowly are like, when they see the changes and how much they've improved, then they're more eager to make those changes with their patients. So I think doctors in general, unless they see the clinical data, tend to be quite skeptical. The problem is that most plant-based nutrition, it's very difficult to test and to do studies on, because number one, they're not supported because we have no pharma. There's no pharma in diet. So many of the biggest trials that occur in cardiology occur with pharmaceutical support. And there's no incentive for pharmaceuticals to do a trial like this, because I take people off medicine. I don't put them on it. And so they're not inclined to support trials. Now, that's not totally fair. The NIH is now getting into doing it, but an NIH grant is hard to get. We haven't done enough studies, and what we talk about often in the ACC committee and our nutrition committee is that our fundamental problem is that we need to show physicians really good randomized control trials, which is something that we all struggle with just due to lack of funds.
Now, you mentioned doctors for themselves experiencing it, and it's interesting that that's actually one of the drawbacks, if you will, or hesitations that doctors have about prescribing food as medicine, is because they themselves are not plant-based themselves. So it's kind of hard if, like, as I was talking to Dr. Kim Williams, about doctors who smoke and then tell their patients don't smoke while they have stains on their hands. So it's very key then to get doctors to actually try a plant-based lifestyle themselves, at least try a plant-based diet.
I think that that's actually the key. The fundamental key is to change the physician first. I absolutely agree, because when I talk to them and say, hey, try this, or they hear me talk to my patients, that's one thing. But when I actually change their lifestyle and they see their benefits, they're blown away. And then they're true believers. And so, yes, that is something, Kim is also on the ACC Nutrition Committee, actually brought me onto the committee, and I have him to thank for that. But we as a group are trying to sort of get that education out there to physicians. So, it's happening. Like, I just did grand rounds at Howard University last week for doctors. And initially, you can see their skepticism on faces, eyebrows are raised. But then as you start going through the trials and explaining to people the pros and cons of different things, they start asking more questions. And there's always the question, wait, there's not enough randomized control trials. How do you know? And that's always going to be the case where I will lose. But I always tell people that you have to remember that you have very little to lose by making these changes and so much to gain. And you can't ignore that there is data that correlates them, even if it isn't a direct relationship that I can offer you right now. And, it's not perfect, but it is, it has to be good enough.
Now, speaking of trying it and demonstrating with patients, what have you seen in the communities that you reach out to?
Oh gosh, I could tell you 100 stories. So, I do plant-based symposiums now at the hospital, and what I do is I bring people in for a half-a-day education seminar on how to change their diet. So I have people, as sort of in generalities, I can tell you stories about people who have come in and say, gosh, I just have so much more energy and my blood pressure, and I take them off their blood pressure medicine and I drop their cholesterol medicine. And then they come back the next week and say, it's so funny. Like I just felt like, playing tennis. I haven't played tennis in 20 years. And then, oh, by the way, it's strange. My joints don't hurt me anymore. And so you hear this sort of stories every day, and that is so affirming. But I can tell you a story about a case that I think of fondly, because it really makes me think about and remind myself that, the past, it's sometimes when there's so many naysayers, you need somebody like that to walk in your door to say, and you go, yes. So I had a patient come in who is a patient I've had for years who was a hypertensive 70-year-old male who has sort of pre-diabetes, which is an early diabetes. And I've been following him for years, and he was on low-dose medications, wasn't interested in a plant-based diet, and that was the end of the story for him in his mind. So then he got admitted. Then he got admitted to another hospital, a hospital I don't go to, and he was admitted there because he was bleeding out of his bottom. So he had rectal bleeding, and so he went into that hospital, and he was in that setting. He was also developing chest pain. So in the setting of his rectal bleeding, he started developing chest pain. He was admitted to the hospital, and he was noted to be significantly anemic. So they gave him 4 units of blood products, and they kept him overnight, made sure he didn't have a heart attack, which he did not. And then they gave him a stress test because they felt that he was exhibiting anginal symptoms or chest pain, that he needed a stress test. So they did a stress test, and it showed multi-zone ischemia, which basically means that multiple areas of the heart showed areas of blockage. So they recommended a heart catheterization, which is when you actually go into the heart through the leg and you open up a blood vessel, a clogged vessel with a stent. So people have heard that as angiogram or angioplasty, or other words people have heard. So he kind of freaked out when he heard that, and he calls me up at this point. This is when I get involved, and he says, Doc, I don't want to do this procedure. What do you think? And I said, look, I'm not seeing you anymore, but I agree. It seems a little fishy that a guy who's bleeding. So remember, what you have to understand about stents is when you go in and have a catheterization and we see a clog, we're going to open it up. So we're going to open it up, but in order to keep that open, you have to put a stent in. And in order to keep the stent open, you have to be on a blood thinner. So that blood thinner is hard and fast rule that if you want to keep that stent open, you need that blood thinner. So if you put somebody who's already bleeding on a blood thinner, then you're just going to cause more bleeding. Right. So you're going to cause more bleeding, then they're going to become anemic again, and they're going to have problems. And then you're going to say, oh, I got to stop the blood thinner. But then if you stop the blood thinner, then you close the stent. If you could see that catch-22. So putting a stent in this patient is not the right decision. And so I recommended that the patient not get the stent. So he came into me the next day, and I said, look, I've been recommending a plant-based diet to you for some time. You have problems with, he had something called diverticulosis, which is when you get these pockets of in your colon because you have constipation, the colon, if you can imagine a balloon, it gets, it's by the pressure of the stool, it thins out. When you get these little outpouchings, and those pouchings, because they're thin, are prone to bleeding. So he had diverticulosis. So he was put on fiber supplements before he left that other hospital. So I said to him, look, let's try this diet. So I spent 2 hours with him. I literally drew pictures for him. I told him where to buy food. I outlined his 7-day meal plan. He came back 3 weeks later, and he's like, you know what? Funny thing, I can't stop pooping. I can't stop pooping. I was like, oh my God. Stop all those stool softeners. So he's like, so I stopped all his stool softeners. Then he came back 2 or 3 weeks later, and he's like, funny thing, I feel really, really good. I haven't had chest pain in weeks, and my bowels are great. And I just haven't had blood in my stool, and since you put me on this diet. And then then 3 months later, still doing great. I started weaning down medications. At 6 months, I repeated his stress test, and it was normal.
Wow,
So,
6 months from surgery, getting ready for surgery, to in 6 months he was able to have a normal stress test.
yeah, and so that doesn't mean, just to clarify, that those clogged arteries are gone. It just means that the demand is, we've resolved his demand problem. And yeah, maybe there was some plaque regression, but I don't know for sure. But I mean, that's an incredible story, and he couldn't believe it. And he's now forever a believer. And, it's stories like that where you're like, yes, it's just so great to see. And I have 100 stories like that of patients who come in and, they come into, when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, I got a lot of patients because rheumatoid patients get a lot of heart disease because it's an inflammatory condition, and inflammation gets everywhere, including in the heart. So I had a lot of people with the rheumatoid and cardiac problems, and sort of just controlling their diet, we were able to control their inflammatory levels so much that not only was their cardiac disease getting better, but so was their rheumatoid. It's mind-blowing.
Well, so as far as rheumatoid arthritis, because I know a number of people who have RA, and it's a very debilitating, illness.
Sure.
Plant-based, so I just want to be clear, in terms of going plant-based, it does help RA.
So every patient is different, and so I can't make that generalization. And so, but there's many things. So there's the concept of the leaky gut, and so this is what needs to be understood. So everybody has their own genetic predisposition to whatever they have based on their families and based on whatever they've gone through. They have their genetic predisposition. That we can change, because you can't change your parents. So, but then you have what we call this second hit. We call this a 2-hit theory, which basically means that something else happens that then triggers that infection, inflammation, whatever, cancer, heart disease to occur. So in some people, it's going to be heart disease. And in some people, it's going to be inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease. And some people like me, it's rheumatoid. And some people, type 1 diabetes. So a lot of these autoimmune diseases are triggered by this inflammation. So how do you get the inflammation? So that's ultimately, because you can't change your genes, that's true, although there's some interesting data that today we can make their modifications, but that's too early. But basically, say we can change your genes, but we can change the inflammation or whatever that is that triggers that gene then to become expressive, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So what you can do then is you have to figure out what it is that's triggering inflammation in your body. And so for everybody, that's going to be something different. However, in most people, and many people, I should say, a food source is a trigger. So if you think of celiac disease, which is a really good, important way to think about celiac disease, is wheat allergy, gluten allergy. So what happens to those patients is when they eat wheat, then it goes into your gut, and when it goes into your gut, the gut actually starts breaking these junctions called tight junctions. So you have the gut is like this, and it doesn't allow things on this side of the bloodstream and this side of the intestine. So the food's going through and it's being absorbed, all the good stuff's being absorbed, and the bad stuff sort of staying in. It's going to become stool and sits here and sits here. And then on this side of my little tight junction here is the bloodstream. And so people who have celiac disease, and this has been studied and confirmed, especially like by people like Alicio Fasano at Mass General, then these tight junctions break. So then what happens is that the inflammatory markers and the things that irritate the body get into the bloodstream, which triggers a massive inflammatory response. Now, a small inflammatory response is normal. It's good for your immune system. But people who have celiac disease, for instance, will have those junctions will be broken for several hours. So then you have the manifestation of significant illness. So celiac patients, that's different than gluten sensitivity. Patients they can have seizures, they can have arthritis, they have diffuse skin manifestations. So celiac disease is a really important example because it shows that food can then be a trigger for inflammation. So then there are other foods that we think trigger different things for different people. And many of those foods often are animal products. And so those animal products, primarily red meat, egg, and dairy. And I believe dairy was my trigger. And so I haven't had dairy in 4.5 years, and I will never have dairy again.
And this is a big deal for a number of people, right? That you see in the community where they've got issues, and you know there's an inflammation or there's a food, but you still get pushback. I see it, of course, with my own friends and family, and I've spoken to a number of doctors too. So what do you tell those people where they're so caught up in their own culture? Culture can be one thing, but also caught up with maybe some issues themselves of being comforted by food. So how do you help those people to overcome their hesitation?
You know, there's no question that that's challenging. I mean, there are many people, even in my own life, that have no interest in hearing what I'm doing. And at some point, everybody has to, you kind of have to let people come to it on their own. There's some of that. At the same time, being stubborn that I am, and knowing that I have some and want to sort of give people information, you know, I try to give it slowly to people, and we talk about reading food labels. And sometimes reading food labels is sort of the start of it, which is something that's helped me where, for instance, I'll show people and look in their fridge and I'll say, you know, I was looking at this food label and there's like 35 things on this label. What do you think of that? And they're like, oh yeah, I don't even know what half that stuff is. And so then I start going through with them and saying, oh gosh, you know, do you know this has trans fats in that? And they're like, no way, trans fats are illegal. No, actually, let me tell you about that. Or, and then, you know, like, look at these things, and 3 or 4 of these. Oh, look, there's 5 different oils in this bread. That's amazing. Bread doesn't have oil in it. How crazy is that? And then you start looking at a little more, and you're like, oh my God, there's 5 different preservatives. Let's leave this on the counter, and let's see if it molds. You know, and so. You know, and so I sort of have those kind of conversations. People are blown away, and you know, bread should mold. You know, food should get bad. You know, but somehow we have made bread that never gets bad. I mean, I have seen bread that sits on your counter for 5 weeks and still continues to live on.
I love that idea that you have, though. It's not intimidating.
It's not intimidating.
It's educational. People, and you almost guide people, but you show them the door, but they still walk through that door.
You know, I think the thing is that everybody, I've also learned, you know, I'm old enough now, I have 3 small kids. I know now that the best education I give is when I let people figure it out themselves. And so pushing myself onto other people isn't also the message, because then, I mean, people have to figure these things out themselves. All you can do, like you said, is open the door for them. And so that's what I try to do, as much education as I can, and say, hey, let's look at this together. You know, I was just looking at this, and I think it helps. And then people start asking more and more questions, which is the start of a beautiful relationship.
Now, you have a book that helps people. And if I'm not mistaken, you just released that book in August of this year. Yeah. And the book is called Finding Balance. Yeah. Can you tell us a little more about what the book is and how you started it?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess maybe, you know, I sort of alluded to the fact, or maybe sort of set out that 5 years ago, I had this illness. So I guess for me, that illness was very, very difficult, because a person like me falls very hard when you get sick, because I always had this perception of myself that I was doing everything right. I mean, I was working full time. I was raising 3 kids under 4 years old. I was sleeping 4 hours a night. I was doing everything. I made their cupcakes and I made their lunch. I nursed my babies. Because that's what you do. You're a mom, you're a subspecialist, and I believed I had to do everything. And so when I got sick, I thought, how could I get sick? You know, it took years for me to understand that I was the perfect person to get sick. I was massively inflamed. So I had a lot of anger. I used to blame my 3rd child, who I'd had 4 months before I got sick, and said that if I hadn't had that 3rd child, then I would never have gotten sick. I had a lot of anger towards her. So I kind of wrote this for her, because it took me, if I hadn't gotten sick, then I don't even know where I'd be. And in some ways, being sick was the best thing that's ever happened to me. And that's a crazy thing to say, but I truly believe it, because that daughter of mine who I was mad at, she saved me. Because if I had gone down it, I shudder to think how I would have ended up. And so this book is written sort of as a love for her, to sort of appreciate what she gave me. And what I've done, I did this with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Jyoti Rao, who's a functional medicine, internal medicine doctor. And what we did is we put together, we tried to make it as scientific as we could without overwhelming people. And so we talk a lot about the microbiome and the leaky gut, which I think is a lot of the triggers for inflammation. And then we try to explain to people about chronic illness and how it's progressively increasing over time. And why is that? Like, why are we seeing so much more Alzheimer's disease and cancers that we never saw before? And heart disease it continues to be the #1 killer of men and women. And then we sort of look at Asia and we say, well, wait, why don't they have these problems? They have other problems for sure, but they're not dying of the same disease as we are, and they don't see as much Alzheimer's disease. What are we doing different? So we try to bring out a lot of questions about sort of what's being done differently and why we're getting different diseases. And so many of our diseases, as you know, are preventable. And so then we try to give people very practical tools on how to change their life. And so what I mean by that is we focus primarily on diet. There's a large section on diet in terms of eliminations that we recommend, and then things to add back. And then we try to go through other things that have been really important for me. For instance, I never slept before. I used to wear it as a badge of honor that I didn't need sleep. I don't need to sleep. I got this, but that's absolutely not true. And so much inflammation occurs when you don't sleep, and you really do need to sleep 8 hours or 7 to 9 hours for the average adult a night. And that's overlooked because we are a society that's always on. Our screens are always on, our LED lights, our cell phones are on. We're constantly using social media. And so we talk a lot about sort of sleep and the importance of sleep and the importance of relaxation, and that it's okay and to allow yourself time to relax and to take breaths and to take moments for yourself. And I don't mean the day going to the spa, which, that would be nice for everybody for sure, but most of us don't have the time or money to do that. And so just simple things like taking deep breaths. And for instance, I have a mantra I say to my children. It's literally 6 words, or maybe a few more, that I say to my children every night before they go to bed. And while they do their deep breaths, I tell them to do 10 deep breaths. I tell them what to say, and then they do it. And it's amazing the calming effect it has on both me and them. And we can't forget the importance of just having that. You have to remember that everybody is a balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So like if you're chasing a cheetah, you're being chased by a cheetah, you're running like crazy, so you need your sympathetic nervous system. But then what happens is then you stop and you rest. And you need that rest time to rebuild and heal. Otherwise, your body's in a constant state of movement. And in that movement state, you're in a constant state of inflammation. And we talk a lot about the imbalance between parasympathetic and sympathetic. And so by allowing yourself that time to rest and digest, which is what the parasympathetic nervous system does, you allow yourself to heal. And you calm down the inflammation and cortisol. And that's been studied as well. And so we really recommend and advocate sleep, types of meditation, and not like crazy yoga where you've got to do crazy positions, but just simple things that you can do for yourself, working on your posture, working on your breath, and of course talking about exercise.
It sounds like something I could use. A lot of people could use. So as far as the books, we have 2 chapters of your book that we have online as part of the giveaway page on plantpuresummit.com. But where can they find the actual book if they want to find out about it?
Sure. Yeah, so you can get it on the website, on my website, or Dr. Rao's website, and it's just drmonicaggarwal.com, or it's available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com as well. So either one, we are doing signed copies of the ones you buy off our website, but otherwise you can easily get it off Amazon, and we're working on an ebook. It's everything takes longer than you think.
God, I know exactly what you mean. Now, you've taken a new position, and actually you were just in Malaysia, as you mentioned earlier, and you're back here in and you've taken a new position at the University of Florida. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell us more about that position.
Sure. So I was working here in Baltimore. I went over to Malaysia to teach medical school. So I taught medical school in a 4-year medical school. So all the medical schools in Asia or in Malaysia are 5-year programs. And so they're not postgraduate, they're post-high school. So you go out of high school and then you go into medical school. The problem in Malaysia is they were having that they were not feeling like they were training good physicians. So they wanted to collaborate with the American medical system, not because we're better, but just to sort of understand how to do a postgraduate medical school, which is sort of after college, then the postgraduate. So I went in as part of that, teaching the 4th-year medical students. And it was incredible. I was blown away. I loved it, every minute of it, and just forever changed from that experience. So, but when I came back, then for sure I wasn't going to be able to go back into the same model. And if you get a lot of clarity sometimes when you pull away from things, isn't it? And so I just wanted to focus I wanted to focus on cardiology because I love it, but I also wanted to focus on the nutrition. And so University of Florida has given me a very unique position where I get to do both. I get to do a lot of teaching. I get to do a lot of the cardiology that I love, but I'm going to be building up a nutrition segment of cardiology. So working in the medical school in terms of teaching nutrition classes, and I'm hoping to start cooking classes. We'll see, and teach the medical students how to cook, and then sort of also building up a center there. I mean, I have lots of ambitions. I want to start a community garden. I want to get people. It'll be very interesting. The University of Florida's in Gainesville, which a lot of the counties in Gainesville, outside of Gainesville, are quite poor. And and it's similar in some ways to inner city Baltimore, which is where I've been practicing. And a lot of people's complaint is that getting healthy food is expensive and I can't afford it. And so I would like to show people ways to eat well in a very inexpensive way. And so I imagine my community garden where people are going to come over and they're going to pick up their vegetables. And so the opportunity in Florida is really special for me. It's going to be a big move for my family for sure, but I think it's worth it because I'm going to be able to practice cardiology in the way I want and really build up a passion of mine, which is building up a nutrition program.
So as far as starting this nutrition program, building it, and I've built a number of training programs actually for colleges and universities as well.
But you can help me then.
And I understand some of the challenges because you have people within the organizations, in the academic space, there's always someone that's going to contradict what you say. Do you see some of that pushback, or are you planning for that in terms of introducing plant-based nutrition as part of an overall nutrition course for cardiologists?
Yeah, so I'd like to do that PlantPure Jumpstart program with my colleagues, but I don't want to come off strong. I want to sort of come off, get to know the lay of the land for sure, and then my goal is not to change people in a way that makes people uncomfortable. I want people to change because they find that it benefits them. And so I have found that sometimes just moving slowly and just sort of educating in a quiet and slow way is the way to go. And so, yeah, I expect there'll be resistance, but there's less resistance now, I would say, than even 2 years ago. Like our part of the nutrition committee, the fact that there's an ACC nutrition committee is a big deal. The fact that there was a lifestyle course at the ACC, the American College of Cardiology conference, which is our big cardiology conference, that's a whole new thing. That's really exciting. And, next week I'm doing a big, there's a big medical webinar thing called ViewMedi, and ViewMedi, ViewMedi, and it's sort of like a physician-based webinars that come to us and we can all watch on our computers, and we get CME credit for it, or continuing medical education credit. And the ACC Nutrition Committee is doing one on nutrition, and I'm doing one, for instance, on the impact of dairy next week. And so people are interested, people are signing up for it, they're curious. And I'm also part of a physicians group. A lot of women physicians get together like on Facebook, and there's a group I'm part of that there's like 5,000 women physicians on it. And I threw it out there that I'm doing this, and then I was blown away by the number of people that were curious, that had questions, that wanted to know how to do it. And so there are more people out there now, I would say, than there were 2 years ago that are interested in. Yeah, there'll be naysayers, but I'm okay with that. I don't need to change the world. I just need to do it, or maybe I do need to change the world, but just one person at a time.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. So we're seeing, and you're seeing really some big changes coming, that people are finally in the medical profession,
Yeah.
that are being more open to the idea. Some are fully embracing it, but others are at least more open. So you're seeing that movement.
Absolutely. It's definitely slow. People email me all the time and say, well, who in my area is doing plant-based? And often in those areas, I don't know anybody, and that could be my own lack of knowledge, but it could also be that there's just nobody there, which is the other problem. And so, we're not where we need to be, but I think as physicians, we notice that there's a problem. And having Kim Williams as the head of the ACC was a big deal. And, Kim is a fabulous man and just a huge breath of great energy. And as a plant-based supporter, it was huge to have him in that role, because then all of a sudden, things that look maybe fringe, like nutrition sadly looks fringe to a lot of physicians, all of a sudden becomes mainstream, where people are like, I don't actually know anything about this. Let me try to understand a little bit about this. Really? Is there some data? Really? And so people start getting more interested.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being part of this first ever PlantPure Summit. And again, people who want to find out more can go to draggarwal.com.
Yeah, drmonicaggarwal.com, or however we're working on. I'm trying to learn how to use Facebook and all these things, but just going through your site is a good way to get linked.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our watchers here at the PlantPure Summit. If you want to find out more about the efforts of PlantPure Nation, don't forget, check out plantpurenation.com. Thank you for being part of the summit.